would like to have your thoughts on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court redrawing the 2011 congressional maps using a California professor with zero citizen input. Both of you have focused on how important citizen input is. And really would like to have your thoughts, but would also like to have your recommendations for how we can avoid a repeat of having courts draw congressional maps. Now, I say that speaking from a perspective of personal experience and the experience of my constituents when it comes to splitting not only a county, but down to the municipality in which I live. And in 2018, I'm sure you're familiar that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and if you asked my constituents, would say that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court gerrymandered our congressional districts. For the first time, they took it upon themselves to split York County. The dividing line, interestingly, between the 10th and the 11th congressional districts is my backyard. So while I go to bed at night in the 10th congressional district, I wake up and I look out my window at the 11th congressional district. And what I will tell you is that taking it upon myself to do some research on this, I went over to the state archives, which is really an incredible place that if you're a geek and you like data and history, Senator Argyle, it's our kind of place, right? So, but I went over there and they were very helpful, and the earliest congressional district map that I was able to access was 1840, and subsequent maps therein. And what was interesting to note is that York County had never been divided. Not only had York County never been divided, York County had never been divided from Adams County. And for those of you who are listening in, Adams County was at one time part of York County. We have the YAIAA, which is the York Adams Interscholastic Athletic Association, the House districts. When I was honored to serve in the State House, we referred to ourselves as the York and Adams delegation. So right now, more than half of my county is in with a congressman who represents Lancaster County. And the irony is that when I talk to my constituents, said, look, it'll be fine, you know, Lancaster County, it's kind of like York County. Many of my constituents shared with me they have nothing in common with Lancaster County. As a matter of fact, they said that they had more in common with the citizens of northern Harford and Baltimore counties in Maryland than they do with those in Lancaster. So clearly, citizen input was not heard, and I don't really think that the courts do know what's in the best interest of keeping communities together. And it was interesting to me because on our first panel with Dr. Brunel, Mr. Gonzalez, and Pastor Cortez, Mr. Gonzalez was asked a question, and his response was, venturing into another part of the state would be difficult for us, right? So talk to me about that process, and really, how can we assure that the courts don't gerrymander our districts without citizen input?
Would you like me to go first? Or?
I would love
Okay.
either. Thank you.
Sure. Well, Senator, there's a lot there in your question, and let me see if I can sort of unpack it one step at a time. I think I and we, the Committee of 70 and our Draw the Lines project, are in complete agreement that Pennsylvania maps ought to be drawn by Pennsylvanians. And if you go back and look at the report of the Advisory Commission, that's very clearly stated there too. You noted that, and I should also say our organization was not part of the 2018 suit. I wasn't on the inside of that. I was watching that with great interest. So I can't speak to the conditions under which that unfolded. I know there was lots of back and forth. I would point out, however, that while there was no public input in that process in 2018, there wasn't a whole lot of public input into the process that produced the 2011 maps either. So let's call it a tie game.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I didn't have any input in either of those. I didn't arrive in the legislature until 2015, so yes.
Sure. Well, history is history, but, we're looking forward. So in terms of, which is, by the way, the spirit that energized our Draw the Lines project. It says, let's, again, as I said earlier, let's give Pennsylvanians a chance to weigh in. Recognizing that if you're in York County or Crawford County or Northampton County or whatever, you're going to know your community pretty well, but it's a big commonwealth, and you can't be expected to know all 67 counties or all 2,800 municipalities or whatever it is. But the advantage of doing this with so many people, there's this sort of a concept of the wisdom of crowds, which is really like underlying our democracy. If everybody knows a little bit about their corner of Pennsylvania, when you aggregate them together, you're going to get some pretty wise and grounded sense of how those communities should be organized. So that, again, that was very much the spirit of that exercise. In terms of your work going forward, it seems to me, and that, again, armed with a draft map, if you in fact have the opportunity either by Zoom or physically to go to as many communities as possible and say, you may not know what this whole map looks like, but you can tell me about York County, you can tell me about Berks County, and then you're back to the basic way in which you folks always do your job, which is to say, I've got competing interests here, I need to hear from people on both sides, and then the judgment ends up in your lap. But I don't know any better way to do it than, armed with a map, taking that to local communities, however they define themselves, and getting that feedback and using that to improve a draft map into a revised map and ultimately a final map. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you very much.
Mr. Ali?
I echo many of the sentiments of my colleague, Mr. Thornburg. I think the best way to prevent, again, the courts from feeling the necessity to weigh in on maps is to ensure that there's a process in place that legitimately weighs input from the public. So, being able to structure a process, a viable, tangible process that definitely and clearly takes into consideration public input is an essential aspect. I know the senator, she mentioned her constituents who form a community of interest, and it's important for their input to be weighed. Now David spoke of taking a map around to various communities for comment and feedback, which I support. But there's also a number of organizations that are currently having conversations throughout the Commonwealth with self-defined communities of interest and documenting what those communities of interest consider to be of value in a particular area, a common area, and using that as a base for creating a map, a regional map, a unity map, and or data points. And all of these efforts, I think, should be considered and should be weighed when we're talking about creating a final map that really has the input of the public. I think we're off to a good start. We have some solid recommendations from a number of organizations. I think we need to take those seriously and put an infrastructure in place that can honestly weigh and evaluate public input and use that as a basis for drawing the maps. Thanks.
Thank you, and I appreciate that very much. And I will tell you that one of the concerns that I had as a member of this committee was that a lot of those organizations that were advising on the census were not reflective of the more rural parts of our state. And we had to work, and I appreciate the support of both at the time Chairman Williams and our former state government chair in assuring that rural advocacy groups were included, and I certainly hope that the rural parts of the state are not forgotten in terms of this effort as well. So I thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Chairman, I yield.